How many of you have set New Year's resolutions? And specifically, like to go to the gym? Lots of people set New Year's resolutions to go to the gym, but little make it past a month. Going to the gym, to be honest, is a lot of effort. To begin with, it feels like you don't get much out of it, especially if you don't stick to it. But you see, if you do stick to it and continue going weekly, over a period of time, you start to notice changes. You eat less, you have more energy, you have more patience and tolerance, and you may have noticed, possibly, a little bit of weight loss or even some toning. It can be hard to stick to something that can feel like you're not getting much from it in the first little while. And it can feel disheartening. It can feel like there is a lot to give and you don't get a lot in return. But if we have discipline, eventually we reap the rewards. Like the gym, our prayer life is similar. It takes a lot of work to grow a relationship and can be hard, especially if you feel like God isn't answering. But if we take the time and have discipline, we're able to see God's hand in things. Life is so busy. It's an excuse all of us make that we are too busy and don't have enough time to fit God in. And even if there is free time, we tend to fill it with mindless things like scrolling, either on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook. The enemy has a hand in it, and the enemy has made it so easy to keep us distracted that we don't realize we have been until our heads hit the pillow. By then, we might try and pray, but before we know it, we are fast asleep and have only made it halfway through our prayer. I, along with probably most of us in this room, have been in that exact spot, where I have committed to every possible thing besides my relationship with God, only remembering to speak with Him at the end of the day when I'm too tired to even think straight. Creating a life full of busyness and not much of God doesn't last very long before things start to crack and fall apart. You see, we aren't made to have a separate life from God, and we aren't made to be so busy. Our body is made to rest, and that's why God created a specific day where we can spend it with Him. He knew that we would fill our lives with busyness, and that's one of the reasons why we have the Sabbath day. Yet some of us still seem to make that day even busy with commitments. Sometimes our heart can be in the right place, but our mind is somewhere else completely different. We're fixated on the 101 jobs that we have to do that we've signed ourselves up for. I have also been here. My home church is Central Coast Community Church, and since I started attending when I was young, I have been serving. My parents were very big on serving, and we always were involved in a lot of areas of church. Although our hearts were in the right place, and to be honest, there wasn't really anyone else to fill the role at the time, our weeks would be busy, and then when it got to the weekend, it seemed like our weekends were even busier. We would get home after church and all go and have naps because we were exhausted and we totally missed out on spending time with God together. Before we knew it, Sabbath was over and it would be a new week and the cycle would continue. Don't get me wrong, serving is so important in keeping a church thriving, but it is also vital that we learn what we are capable of doing and adding to our load, and what could actually be detrimental to our relationship with God. We can serve and have a growing relationship with Him. It's all about moderation and not letting the enemy turn something good into a distraction. We need to be mindful of what helps us grow closer with God and what causes us to lose sight of Him. Why don't you make time with God? Is it because you cannot physically see Him that you forget Him altogether? Just like a friend you rarely see, there are things that trigger memories of them that remind you to contact them, whether that's a meal or a fragrance or an item of clothing, whatever it may be. We can create those same reminders with Jesus too. If we struggle to regularly communicate with him, create something that helps you speak with him. Whether that's a Bible verse where you put it somewhere that you see regularly, or a chair that you sit on where you speak specifically to him. Whatever it is that will help you be more intentional about praying, create it. A Bible verse that reminds me to pray is Philippians 4 verse 6. And it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." This Bible verse is very significant to me because God uses it constantly to remind me that all I need to do is speak with him. Over and over again in my life, this verse has popped up, and I have known that God is with me, and all I need to do is pray because he is listening. People pray for all different reasons. Some pray when they have nothing else left, when it's their last resort. Some people pray because they need answers. Some people pray because they want something. And some people pray because they are looking for forgiveness or to thank God. And some people are all of those. Prayer brings us closer to God and helps to form a solid foundation built on good communication. Just like you can't have a relationship without communication, you can't have a relationship with God without speaking to him regularly. If you'd like to turn with me in your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 1, we're going to read about a woman who made a very powerful prayer. We'll start off with verse 1 and 2. We'll start off with verse 2. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. In verse 1 and 2, we are met here with Elkanah, who was an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah was able to have many children, whereas Hannah was not able to have any. In the Old Testament times, a childless woman was considered a failure. Her barrenness was a social embarrassment for her husband. Children were a very important part of society's economic structure, meaning the more children you had, the more wealthy you were classified to be. They were a source of labour for the family, and it was their duty to care for their parents in their old age. If a wife could not bear children, she was often obligated by ancient Middle Eastern custom to give one of her servant girls to her husband to bear children for her, which is what we know of with Sarah, as she does for Abraham, giving him Hagar. Although Elkanah could have left Hannah because a husband was permitted to divorce a barren woman, he remained lovingly devoted to her despite social criticism and his rights under civil law. Let's continue reading verse 3. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord. She used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and did not eat. This shows us that Elkanah loved Hannah as much, if not more, than Peninnah, because he chose to stay married to Hannah, which therefore made Peninnah jealous. Peninnah is so jealous that she provokes Hannah so severely and to such a serious degree that Hannah doesn't eat. Let's continue in verse 8. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" Even if Hannah did feel like she was enough, with Peninnah constantly whispering hate or hurt into Hannah's ears, it was hard for Hannah to think of anything different, because when you're told something over and over again, you eventually start to believe it. We'll continue from verse 9. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give me, your servant, a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord. I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." So in verse 11, it says that no razor shall touch his head. And I just wanted to highlight that point because that was a Nazirite vow that they made to make them separate from the rest of the group. And they devoted their lives to God. And also vexation, if you're not sure what that means, I didn't. It means annoyed or puzzled or frustrated or irritation. We'll continue from verse 17. Then Eli answered, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your eyes." Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to the house at Ramah, and Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called him Samuel, for she said, "I have asked for him from the Lord." Through Hannah's faithful prayers, God blessed Hannah with a son. Hannah honored her vow to God, and when Samuel was at the right age, she gave her son to Eli and therefore back to God. For the longest time, my prayers have been surface level. It would consist of things like, "Be with my family, thank you for my day, forgive me for my wrongdoings, help me to be more like you." And all these things were great, but it wasn't really anything deeper than that. It wasn't that I didn't have challenges in my life, because I definitely did, but throughout those challenges, I would pray constantly, and then when those challenges would pass, I would go back to having surface level conversations with God. This all changed for me though at the end of 2019. I had just finished my HSC and I was trying to work out what my plans were for the new year. I decided to make a New Year's resolution to be more intentional about my prayer life and studying my Bible. I had heard from someone that reading your Bible was how you got to know God, and praying was how God got to know you. And I began to understand the reason why I needed both. I was very intentional about my New Year's resolution for about a month and a half before my whole world was turned upside down. At the end of February, my mum got a phone call that my dad had been in a motorbike accident and rushed to Melbourne Hospital. Every year, my dad and some of his mates would travel down to Phillip Island to see the races and then ride back, but on their way down this time, something happened, causing Dad to come off his bike, and to this day we still don't really know what that something was. My dad was put into an induced coma in the ICU, and we were told that it didn't look good. Some of my family flew down to Victoria that day to be with him. We were at the hospital for a week, praying for something good to happen, praying that he would wake up. But unfortunately, all the tests showed that there wasn't much responsiveness. During the time, we were amazed at the support and kindness shown to us by the nurses and doctors, our friends and family, and the staff at the hospital. There were so many times when we were shown so much love and kindness where God was working. To name a few, there was only allowed to be 2 people in the room to see Dad at a time, but they waived that for us. They allowed all of us into Dad's room on Sabbath to anoint him and have a little service where we would sing songs. There was probably about 10 people in there. There was a nurse who asked to have us multiple times because she saw the love and light in such a hard time, where other rooms, families were arguing or not even speaking to each other, and there was something different about us. Trees fell down so that a helicopter could land to get Dad. A medical professional found Dad at the scene and was able to keep him comfortable until the helicopter came. And even the team working with us saw God, as a doctor said to one of the nurses that I don't really think they realise the severity of his injuries. But the nurse said, no, they do. They just have faith. On the 7th of March, 2020, we said goodbye to Dad. It was another Sabbath when he passed. We were able to have one last church service with him, where we sung and prayed. Because Dad was a healthy, non-smoking, non-drinking 49-year-old man, he was able to give his organs to many people, and although it was the hardest day for us, it brought some good, hope, and life to those who received his organs. During this week, and even after, my prayer life was carried by those around me as we prayed together. But as the weeks got on, I found that I drew closer to God because he seemed to be the only person who knew how I was feeling without me having to explain, and the only person who I could talk to who understood. As I found my friendships crumbling because of the disconnect, my relationship with God became stronger. I began to crave spending time with him, having someone that I could depend upon who didn't need anything from me. It was the first time I really understood how amazing prayer was and the benefits that came from it. As I leant on God, he held me up, and where I lacked, he filled. I started my nursing degree 3 weeks late because of everything, and spent a lot of time catching up on work. Throughout my nursing degree, I really struggled to get through my units. Thank you. I really struggled to get through my units. I would find myself putting in heaps of effort, but barely passing. When it came to placements, I thought that I would love them, but quickly found that I barely got to spend any time with the patients, which was the whole reason why I wanted to do nursing. Going straight into nursing was a great choice for me. It gave me something else to focus on at the time. It was during my nursing degree when I started to feel a pull towards theology. I had had this feeling before, but this time it was stronger. I wasn't sure if it was just because I wanted out of nursing or if it was God telling me this is where He wanted me. So I began to pray intentionally about it and started studying my Bible with a theology friend who could answer some important questions I had about the degree and my fears. Over the period of a few months, I started to see Philippians 4 verse 6 everywhere I went. I began praying over and over to God, asking Him to show me signs that theology was where He wanted me to be, and again, He answered my prayers. The final straw was my mum. A few years before, I had signed a form at Big Camp saying that I was interested in ministry, and let me be fully honest, when I signed that form, I didn't really know what I was signing. My pastor at the time, Chapo, had gotten my form and contacted my mum about mentoring me. And when my mum was contacted, she said that I was confused and didn't realize what it meant and what it did. But if I wanted to, I could. Although this was the case, Bethany and Chapo still mentored me on duties of being a pastor. They got me to preach and lead out in different pastoral duties. So when I told my mum in 2021 that I felt called to ministry and that I wanted to transfer from nursing to theology, she wasn't fully on board. I began to pray continually that Mum's mind would change and that she would be supportive of my choice. A few weeks later, Mum and I were driving home late at night and started having a deep conversation about Jesus, the end times, Dad, and some of our fears. At the end of that conversation, Mum leant over to me and said that she thought that I was meant to change to ministry. The next day, I transferred from nursing to theology and enrolled in my semester 2 units ready to go. And a few weeks into semester 2, people started seeing a change in me. I was happy and had peace and knew that I was where God wanted me. I'll be honest, I forgot about my New Year's resolution after my dad's accident, but God didn't. Although I wasn't mindfully grabbing my Bible or praying because of the resolution I had made, I found myself praying to God because I didn't know what else to do. He was the only being who understood my pain and how I was feeling, and I constantly found myself speaking to Him because of it. After my dad's accident, I found that although my relationships with my friends crumbled, my relationship with God flourished. I began wanting to speak with God more and seek who He was, so I began to study my Bible each day also. It's crazy how, even in the worst times, there's still some good that can come out of it. Although my dad's death was the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, I do believe God used it to bring so many more people to God. During my dad's life, he had brought so many to God and shown so many people His love, and it was really amazing to see that even in his death, God was still using him to bring others to Christ. How blessed are we to have a faith and a hope in God, knowing that one day He will come back to take us all to be with Him who believe and to live for eternity. I so look forward to seeing Dad again when that day comes. Spending time with God each day is so important for every aspect of life. I have found that when I spend intentional time with God, my day is so much better. I am a better person to others, and I am a better person to myself. I am more patient, more generous, more kind. My whole attitude changes because I become more like God. You see, the more time you spend with Him, the more you become like Him. I want to make a challenge for myself to pray continuously and be intentional with my time And I want to encourage each person here today, no matter where you are in your relationship with God, that you pray and grow your relationship with Him. You'll be all the better for it.